recording. Okay, so let's continue on then. Again, uh, be able to study to identify the 5 layers of the thick skin, and notice the order. If I was to use a uh, a a pen, for example, if I push in forward from outside in, which layer would I touch first? Karen Smith, do you have a question? Karen? Karen?
Which Karen?
I'm sorry, Karen Smith.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Did you raise your hand? Okay, I didn't see anything. Karen Smith, you have your microphone on. Do you want to say something? I don't know what happened to Karen. All right, so again, be able to um, identify the 5 layer or know the 5 layers. And if particularly if I've used a pen to push it through your skin, which layer would I touch first? I would touch the stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum basal. And of these 5 layers, the the only layer that has cell that is dividing is this one. Okay, so this one has cell that are dividing. But the rest of them, they stop dividing because probably they don't have enough nutrients, if you will, and oxygen. The stratum spinosum, and if you look at closely, it looks like the cells has, spike. That's hence the name, like that. And the reason why this is because it's an artifact. Because when you process the tissue, the cells shrink, but this they still seem to link together by this, and it looks like a spike, and it's really intercellular connection. You know, in fact, you should know those 3 intercellular connection. The strongest intercellular connection. Remember we talked about that. Um, Janus Janus. What is the strongest intercellular connection?
Desmosome?
Hmm?
Desmosome?
Oh, yes, good. Desmosome, very nice. Good. Um, and in the process of this, in the processing of the sample, the 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 cells shrink. So hence they give you that spinous. Now this is where the cells started to put in a lot of the pigment. Okay, the the pigment, so that the inside the cells will look like there's a lot of granule. Um, and again, the 5th layer would have this stratum lucidum, but your normal skin have 4 layer, you don't have this. The word lu, Lu, is mean light, okay, as in lux, root word lux mean light. So if you stratum lucidum is the area that is very light, okay, is very light. Okay. The word corneum, the word Greek word for corneum is corn, which means same thing as horn, right? So, for example, Gaian. Can you hear me, Gaian? Gaian?
Yes.
Gaian, do you have a sticker with a horse and one horn in your room?
No.
You don't? Okay. What is a horse with one horn called?
A horse with one horn?
Yeah.
A unicorn?
Yeah, good. Unicorn. Exactly. So you see corn mean horn, right? So in the fall you might have these things right here. You have a basket of food, fruits and stuff like that. What do you call that? Horn of abundance. What's a horn of abundance called? Around Thanksgiving? You don't know what you guys don't know what a horse? Karen Smith, you raise your hand again? Karen Smith. Karen Smith, what is a horn of abundance called? I don't know what this happened to this Karen Smith woman. It's known as cornucopia. Cornucopia. Okay. So the word horn is the same thing as corn, right? That's the idea. Horn is the same thing as corn. So in the eye, for example, here, there's this part that's sticking out. We call that the cornea. So it looks like it's protrusion out. They call that cornea. So in this area here, it looks like there's a lot of horn that's coming out. And that's why it's called the stratum corneum, the outermost layer. Okay. All right. In the epidermis, for example, here's we can say this. It doesn't have any blood vessel. It's very keratinized. It has your cell that secrete melanin called melanocyte. The brain put out a hormone called melanin-stimulating hormone, MSH, and that melanin-stimulating hormone stimulate the melanocyte to put out melanin. And of course, as an epidermis, it has to sit on the basement membrane. In this case, it's stratified. Again, shows you the 5 layers are. You see, this looks like there are many layers. Here's stratum corneum, the light layer here, stratum spinosum, lucidum, and there's stratum, look like granule here, granulosum. Granules in there, stratum basale, and then here is the stratum basale, the layer. And you can see here is the dermal papillae. Dermal papillae move upward to give you the projection that gives you rise to the fingerprints. And that's the same thing seen here. The dermal papillae right here. And the dermal papillae, that's basically is what gives rise to the fingerprints. And it's a very interesting because everyone has different scroll pattern. And because of that, you can do fingerprinting, match it up. If you're at the crime scene, they does some fingerprinting, and then it's similar mass to your, that means you were there, you're present. Maybe your fingerprints on the gun, on the knife, for example, right? Okay. Any question? Alrighty, that's a dermal papillae. Which one of the 5 layers of cells, right, in your hand have dividing cells? Does anybody know? Abdu, what's the answer? Abdu? Turn on your microphone, guys, if you want to talk. Abdu? Or Richard?
Was that the stratum basale?
Yeah, stratum basale, very nice. Remember that, okay? That's the only layer, that's the one near the dermis that can divide. But within the stratum basale, that's where you see a lot of these cells, particularly these 2 cells. The Merkel cells, which is it really part of the sensory cells, kind of like the Merkel cells, and the melanocyte, and these are the cells that secrete melanin. Okay, so that's also another one to import. And these melanocyte is responding to MSH, which is melanin stimulating hormone. All right. So we're just going to go through these briefly about the layer, the spinosum, the spiny layer. And basically, the eye here the cells shrink, right? Um, they well, it's a continue dividing. They're really not supposed to dividing. They're actually going through the process of dying because they don't have enough um, nutrients. Um, in this layer, you might see dendritic cell. Okay, so DC cells. What is the importance of DC cell? They activate the immune response. Okay, that's the key there. So the DC cells, DC cells. I won't ask you where find which layer, but it's because it's part of the skin. You have DC cell which activate the immune system. Granulosum, and the cells has a lot of granule. And what does this granule have? They have these proteins called keratin. It's a tough fibrous protein. That these keratinized structure is what you see in your hairs and your nail. These keratin actually form these dense granule, and that dense granule is known as keratin hyaline. Keratin hyaline. All right. And stratum lucidum is, again, the word luz means light. It's only found in the fifth layer, in the palms and the sole, but you don't see it in the typical the skin here, full layer. Stratum corneum is the outermost. It has the most layers of cells, keratinocyte. And usually when you want to make your skin nice and smooth and shiny, people might want it to exfoliate the skin. And by exfoliate, they use a brush and might remove this layer here, the stratum corneum. I'm not going to talk about too much, but there's a process by which how the skin will get its keratin. This process is known as keratinization. Okay. What is keratinization involved? Well, it's keratinization is basically the forms of the dead cells, if you will. Okay. Keratinization often sees most part like we say already. Your hair get keratinized, your nail get keratinized. That's what we mean by keratinization. Okay, that's all. And another important thing that I want you to know with the skin is that it's involved in making chemical and substance. And what is that chemical or substance we're talking about? Eunice. So when we talk about the skin making or synthesizing a substance or hormone, to be specific, what hormone we're talking about? Eunice?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, so what's the answer?
What was the question again?
The skin involved in making the hormone. What is the name of the hormone?
The name of the hormone?
Important for absorption of calcium to the small intestine. I think Abdu know. Abdu, what's the answer?
Like maybe like vitamin D.
Vitamin D, very good. Yeah. So all right. So Gina, you can turn off your microphone.
Okay.
Good. All right. So here is important vitamin D. Okay. You don't need to know all the important part of the vitamin D synthesis that it is calcitriol, become calcidiol, also known as, in this case, cholecalciferol. And the kidney makes it, they call it cholecalciferol into calcitriol. But important thing to note is that people who do not have enough vitamin D, for example, can have a disease known as ricket. Ricket And we also see this very common, you know, you need calcium, and calcification of bone will make the bone hard, right? And if you don't have calcium, lack of vitamin D, in essence, lack of absorption of calcium, you have low calcium. We call that hypocalcemia. So your bone's not going to get calcified very well, and because the lower extremity has to bear the weight of the body, right? And so if you have weak bone, oftentimes you get a condition that looks like this. Okay, called bow-legged. It's known as rickets. Okay, rickets. All right. Here just shows you the way that how different part of the different organ involved in making the product for the important for the active forms of vitamin D. The liver put out a precursor like cholesterol, which then goes to the skin, activates it. The liver further modifies it, and then the kidney modifies it to become calcitriol. Appeal, the intermediate would be calcidiol. Okay, and you need vitamin D to absorb to the small intestine. What is absorb? Calcium. All right, then we can just go back and say pretty much the same thing here. We discussed about this already in the 5 layers. Okay, so that's all we need to talk about. The epidermis. Below the epidermis is the dermis, is this layer. And again, the dermis has 2 layers, okay, or 2 sub layers, you will, within the dermis of these 2 components you see here. We call it the papillary and the reticular. Which one of these has blood vessel? Reticular layer or papillary? So you should thinking. Anybody? Raise your hand. Abdu? Wow. Abdu.
Yes.
What's the answer? Which of these layers has the blood vessel?
The papillary?
No, the papillary is the projection that goes like this, right? They do not have the blood vessel. Jason? The reticular. Good. Yeah. So some of you say the reticular. Good. Thank you, Jason. The reticular layer has the blood vessel. Okay, keep that in mind. Do you have a question, Abdu? Natalia, do you have a question? Natalia? Then. And okay, so the 2 components of the dermis are the papillary and the reticular, and you can see how the reticular has a lot bigger blood vessel. I would say more blood vessel than here. Here you don't have a lot of blood vessel, but it does have this dermal papillae, that projection that goes up to give you the fingerprinting, okay, the fingerprint. So the fingerprint is not due to the reticular layer, is due to the papillary layer. Okay, that's projection that goes up like that projection. Okay. And of course, whenever you have an inflammations of the skin, you call this dermatitis. Typically, we call this a contact dermatitis. And very common, like, if you go down the street and you buy a necklace and they say, oh, it's gold, silver, and you go home, you wear it for a while, and the area might look red, for example. That's due to contact dermatitis, if we will. Contact dermatitis could be typically poison oak and poison ivy. In the immune system, we're going to say this is known as type 4 hypersensitivity, which meaning that it takes time to develop. So if you expose it to the poison ivy or poison oak, you don't get itchy right away. It takes a day after you go camping, a day or the next day it comes and it becomes irritate. Okay. And a good immunosuppressant that you can do to reduce swelling is that you can take hydrocortisone. Okay. Hydrocortisone. Now, Eunice asked me about, is this same thing as eczema? Okay. Now, eczema is completely different. This is actually, eczema is it's autoimmune disease. This is an autoimmune disease in which it's like your immune cell is really attacking your skin, for example. And eczema is very common in people, and typically around elbow area, right here. To be dry, flaky, itchy, is called that eczema. Okay, completely different. In the case of dermatitis, is your body come exposed to something, right? That causes itchiness. But this one, in eczema, for example, is your body does it automatically. Your immune system does it. It's overreactive, if you will. And of course, there are a lot of collagen fiber and elastic fiber in the dermis, and this give it, the stretchability. You see how your skin is very stretched like this because it has these fibers, collagen fiber. And of course, over time, you're like my hands, for example. I don't know if you can see it. As you get older, right? You see a lot of wrinkle. Maybe some female might have wrinkles in the face, so you can have a collagen implant, so get a nice straightening it out. And so your 50-year-old woman now become 20 years old, boom, instantly. And if you can do Botox injection, and Botox is actually a toxin that numbs the muscle up here, and so just keep it tight. Okay. Again, shows you the two layers or two components of the dermis, the papillary layer here and the reticular layer. You can see the reticular layer, much more blood vessel than up here, small capillary, which I don't think is considered as much as down here. But definitely the avascular is the epidermis up here. Okay. All right. Now the dermis does have a little projection that comes out. Okay, this is just dermapapillae. The hair shaft that is part of the hair shaft that comes out. But in the dermis, you can see is these are considered the root of the hair, the root of the hair. And it had some nerve ending. I'm going to show you a little bit, like say, free nerve ending or Pacinian nerve ending in the follicular gland. All right, here's the hypodermis. The hypodermis is the layer underneath. This is the layer that has a lot of adipose tissue. Right? So when we're talking about giving injection sub-Q, what are we doing? We inject it into this right here called underneath sub-Q. Subcutaneous injection is using hypodermic needle. So basically, you just lift up the skin and you inject underneath. Okay. Alrighty. Here just shows you there are a lot of fat cells called the scanning electron micrograph. You see adipocyte, part of connective tissue. There's a lot in the hypodermis. All right, so why don't we take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to talk about the hair follicle, the other accessory gland that are part of the skin. Any question?